Introduction. Breathe. Allow the noise of the outside world to fade for a moment and observe the space it occupies. There is a feeling that it has been following you, a quiet whisper in the depths of your consciousness suggesting that something isn't quite right. It is that persistent intuition that the reality you touch, see, and inhabit is not as solid as you have been taught to believe. We live in an age of mechanical repetition. We wake up, consume, produce, and go back to sleep, following an invisible script written by habit and social expectation. We move through days that seem like predictable loops, convinced that control is real and that security is possible. Yet, in moments of absolute silence or in the midst of the most unexpected chaos, something extraordinary happens. The veil is torn. An anomaly disrupts the frequency of the everyday. We often call these moments of crisis mistakes or bad luck. But what if these weren't system failures, but rather necessary cracks in the canvas of a grand illusion? What the modern world labels a miscalculation, ancient wisdom recognizes as an invitation. A failure is, in essence, a metaphysical awakening. It's the instant the simulation's structure fractures to reveal what lies behind the scenery. Through this journey, we won't seek to repair the cracks, but rather to learn to see through them. This isn't a self-help guide to optimize your routine, but an intimate revelation to dismantle your perception. There are 3 fundamental codes, 3 metaphysical secrets that have remained hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to stop reacting to the script and begin observing the programmer. Today, the facade begins to crumble. I invite you to leave behind the armor of your certainties and prepare your mind for a new architecture of reality. The first step to finding the truth isn't to build something new, but to understand the nature of what is beginning to crumble before your eyes. Because to understand the message, we must first study the anatomy of what we call reality. Chapter 1. The Anatomy of Failure. Consider for a moment the machinery of your own existence. I'm not referring to your body's biological processes, but to the complex web of habits, expectations, and automatic responses that define what you call your day. From the instant you open your eyes, an invisible script begins to unfold. The coffee, the commute, the notifications on your screen, the superficial conversations that repeat themselves with minimal variations. Everything seems to follow a linear logic, an inertia we accept as the only possible reality. In this architecture of the everyday, the mind operates like a data processor seeking efficiency, not truth. We have been conditioned to ignore mystery and embrace utility. But it is precisely in this state of automatism that the alienation that defines modern man is born, that feeling of being physically present, yet absent in essence, like a spectator watching a film whose ending they already know. What we call reality in the context of our current society is often a collective construction of rigid perceptions. We've been taught that the world is solid, predictable, and that our external struggles are the absolute priority. However, the glitch arises when that solidity is questioned. It's not a technical flaw in the fabric of the universe, but a flaw in our willful blindness. Imagine you're walking down a street you've walked 1,000 times. You know every crack in the pavement, every shop window, every familiar face. But today, for a split second, the perspective shifts. The city noise becomes an abstract hum. The colors seem too intense or strangely pale, and suddenly the sense of familiarity vanishes. You feel like a stranger in your own life. In that instant, the script stops. The automatic process is interrupted. That, in its purest form, is the anatomy of the glitch. Most people, when they experience this disorientation, rush to close the door. They reach for their phone, start an irrelevant conversation, or immerse themselves in an urgent task to restore a sense of normality. They fear the anomaly because they mistake it for madness or instability. But for the seeker of wisdom, that moment of dissonance is the most valuable resource they possess. It is the only moment when the mind is neither projecting the past nor anticipating the future. It is the moment when your ego's operating system stops working and allows pure consciousness to observe the structure of the mechanism. The ancient Stoics understood that our crises are not external events, but breakdowns in our internal judgments. For them, the world out there is irrelevant. It is our interpretation that gives it weight, form, and pain. When the world ceases to make sense according to your usual rules, what is truly failing is not the world, but your mental model of it. You are seeing, perhaps for the first time, that the structure you considered immutable is in reality a fluid and fragile projection of your own mind. Observe closely how this breakdown manifests in your life. Sometimes it appears as an existential weariness that sleep cannot cure, or as a question that has no immediate answer. It is the moment you realize that the success you were promised does not fill the void, or that the security for which you sacrificed your time is a statistical illusion. These are not errors of fate. They are signs that the system in which you have been operating can no longer sustain the magnitude of your true nature. To understand the metaphysics of failure, we must unlearn the idea that we are characters within an external simulation. We must begin to see ourselves as the consciousness in which the simulation occurs. The anomaly is an invitation to inspect the code of our beliefs. How many of your current worries are your own, and how many are lines of code inherited from your parents, your culture, or your unresolved fears? Failure offers you the necessary pause to identify these intrusions. The beauty of this process lies in its subtlety. It doesn't require grand mystical revelations or abandoning your everyday life. Instead, it requires serene and ruthless attention. It requires that, when you feel reality faltering, you don't seek support in the familiar, but rather allow yourself to fall a little deeper into observation. It is in this state of suspension that the laws of the ordinary lose their power and the laws of the timeless begin to reveal themselves. We have spent years perfecting our ability to react to what happens, completely forgetting our ability to be what happens. The failure is a reminder that the cell door was never locked. We were simply too busy reading the cell's instruction manual to try and push the door open. If you accept the anatomy of failure as a teaching tool, you will begin to see that every disruption to your peace is actually an access point. External chaos is life's way of telling you that your foundations are built on sand. And it is precisely here, as we watch the architecture of what we thought we knew crumble, that we must prepare ourselves for the first discovery. Because to rebuild on solid rock, we must first acknowledge the fragility of what we considered eternal. As the noise of automatic behavior diminishes and you learn to inhabit the crack, an uncomfortable truth begins to emerge from the depths of your perception, a truth that shakes the very root of our anguish and our hope. It is time to confront the first great distortion of the code, the one that keeps us chained to suffering through sheer ignorance of its nature. Nothing you see is what it seems, because nothing you see lasts long enough to be defined. Chapter 2. The First Secret. The Illusion of Permanence. Stop. Observe the nearest object to you. Perhaps it's a table, a wall, or the device holding these words. Your mind tells you that this object is solid, that it's real, and above all, that it's permanent. Your sense of touch confirms this suspicion. The resistance it offers seems to deny any doubt about its fixed existence. But this is where the first metaphysical secret begins to whisper, that solidity is the densest veil of simulation. What you perceive as an immovable structure is, in reality, a frenetic flow of energy and emptiness, a dance of particles that appear and disappear with a rapidity your senses cannot process. The first major flaw in our mental code is the belief in permanence. We have built our civilization, our fears, and our hopes on the assumption that things are what they appear to be and that they will continue to be so tomorrow. We call home a collection of atoms that are constantly eroding. We call self a stream of thoughts and cells that are completely renewed every few years. We live in a mental photograph, while the real universe is a film playing at infinite speed. Human suffering arises almost entirely from this processing error. We try to cling to forms, relationships, statuses, and bodies as if we could stop the flow of a river by clenching our fist. We feel anxiety when things change because our basic programming tells us that change is a threat to stability, a flaw in the system. But the metaphysical truth is the opposite. Change is not the flaw. Resistance to change is the only true flaw. Imagine you are looking at a high-resolution screen. The image of a mountain appears eternal, majestic, and motionless. But if you could zoom in close enough, you would see that this image is being refreshed thousands of times per second. The mountain is not there statically. It is being constantly recreated by pulses of light. If the pulse were to stop, the mountain would disappear. Your reality works in exactly the same way. The universe is not a finished object. It is an event happening right now. Every second is a new rendering of existence, a new opportunity for configuration that we squander by trying to hold on to the previous version. The ancient sages called this the impermanent nature of all things. The Stoics visualized it as a rushing current where nothing can remain stable. Aurelius reminded himself that time is a river of events, a current so strong that as soon as something appears in view, it has already been swept away, and something else takes its place, only to be swept away in turn. If you manage to integrate this secret, anxiety about the future and regret about the past begin to dissolve. Why suffer over the loss of something that, in essence, was never a fixed possession, but a momentary loan from the universal flow? The metaphysical failure occurs when you stop seeing the mountain and start seeing the screen refresh. It is in that moment of clarity that you understand that the pain you feel from the loss is the result of having tried to freeze an image that was meant to flow. By accepting the illusion of permanence, you cease to be a prisoner of your circumstances and become an observer of the process. You begin to see crises not as tragic endings, but as necessary transitions from one form of energy to another. Look at your hands. The code that sustains them is constantly transforming. The cells that formed them when you were a child no longer exist. They have been replaced, recycled, returned to the system. Yet you maintain the idea that you are the same. That continuity is the greatest work of art in the architecture of the ego. The ego needs permanence to feel secure, to believe it has territory to defend. But when failure reveals the truth, you discover that you are not the owner of the territory, but rather the space where the territory manifests and disappears. This first secret is the key to true freedom. If nothing is permanent, then no situation is definitive. Your current pain has no solid foundation on which to stand eternally. Your apparent failure is merely a temporary configuration of data. Even your greatest successes are just fleeting shadows on the cave wall. By letting go of the need for things to last, you reclaim immense energy that you previously spent on the futile maintenance of your attachments. What would happen if today you decided to stop fighting against the current? This isn't about passive resignation, but about actively aligning with the most fundamental law of metaphysics. It's recognizing that the glitch that shatters your plans is, in reality, nature returning you to the truth of flow. It's an invitation to stop living in the remembered past or the imagined future and begin to inhabit the only code that has validity, the absolute present, the microsecond of now where reality is simultaneously being created and destroyed. We often wonder why life seems so difficult, why we feel like we're constantly swimming against something. The answer is simple. We're trying to build sandcastles on the shore of a sea that never stops rising. The first secret teaches you to stop building and start swimming. It teaches you that security isn't found in the solidity of things, but in your ability to flow with their disappearance. When you understand that permanence is a perceptual error, the fear of death also changes shape. It is no longer the end of a physical object, but the conclusion of a specific sequence of data that is reintegrated into the source code. It is the ultimate reboot. But we don't need to wait until the end of life to experience this liberation. We can die to our old selves every morning, every hour, with every breath. By dwelling in this truth, your gaze becomes more serene. You observe the drama of the world with the detachment of someone who knows they are watching a play where the actors change and the stage is dismantled each night. This is the peace of the wise mentor. Not the peace of someone who has everything under control, but the peace of someone who has understood that control is unnecessary when you understand the nature of flow. But understanding that everything flows is only the beginning. Once you recognize that the ground beneath your feet is not rock but water, the next fundamental question arises: how do we stay upright? If everything is ephemeral and nothing remains, where do we find the foothold so as not to be swept away by the current? The answer lies not in changing the river, but in transforming the swimmer. To navigate this sea of transience without drowning, we must discover a different kind of stability, one that does not depend on what happens outside, but on the structure of our own inner response. Chapter 3. Navigating the Ephemeral. If you've grasped that permanence is a perceptual error, it's natural to feel existential vertigo. Seeing the world as a relentless, rushing river can leave us feeling like mere fragments of cork adrift, without direction or purpose. However, in the metaphysics of failure, the discovery of impermanence isn't the end of security, but rather the beginning of a much deeper and more authentic form of stability. This is where the seeker's code is strengthened by an ancient tool, the Stoic anchor. Imagine a sailor in the midst of a night storm. He has no control over the force of the waves, the direction of the wind, or the darkness that surrounds him. If he tries to fight the ocean, his exhaustion will be his end. But the wise sailor knows that there is a sacred distinction between the sea and the helm. While the sea is the external, untamed flow, the rudder is your capacity for judgment, your will, and your inner calm. The anchor isn't thrown outward to the bottom of an ocean that never stops moving, but inward to the center of your own being. Navigating the ephemeral requires recognizing that your true strength lies not in your ability to change circumstances, but in your ability not to be defined by them. The flaw in our modern programming makes us believe we will be happy when the river stops flowing, when problems disappear, or when success becomes static. But the code of wisdom tells us that peace is not the absence of the current, but mastery over our response to it. The ancient Stoic masters called this the inner citadel. It is a metaphysical space that the glitch cannot corrupt. You may lose your possessions, your health may falter, and the people you love may be swept away by the flow of time, but no one has the power to enter your mental sanctuary and force you to judge those events as an absolute tragedy. True sovereignty is not power over others, but power over the stories you tell yourself about what happens outside. Every time the world seems to be falling apart, you have a split second before habit takes over. In that space of time lies your freedom. You can react with the old code of fear and resistance, or you can activate the anchor. Activating the anchor means asking yourself with complete honesty, is this something that is entirely within my control? If the answer is no, then any energy spent on distress is a waste of your vital processing. It's a deadline of code that only generates noise in the system. Notice how we squander our peace trying to anchor ourselves in clouds. We seek security in the opinions of others, in a bank balance, or in the permanence of a youthful body. These are all clouds that dissolve as we point at them. The Stoic anchor, on the other hand, clings to the only rock that doesn't erode, your integrity and your ability to reason clearly in the present. It's understanding that, even if the scenery changes 1,000 times, the actor remains the master of their performance. When you stop seeking stability in external things, the world loses its power over your peace of mind. This doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent to life. It means becoming invulnerable to unnecessary chaos. It's loving what you have while you have it, knowing it's a loan from the universe, and letting it go without resentment when the flow decides to reclaim it. The wise person doesn't weep because the flowers wither. They marvel that they bloomed, recognizing that their beauty lies precisely in their brevity. In the architecture of this audiobook, this is a turning point. If the first secret showed you that the ground is water, this anchor teaches you how to build a ship. The metaphysics of failure is not a philosophy of hopelessness, but of radical liberation. By accepting that you don't control the outcome of your actions, but you do control the intention and virtue behind them, you become unshakable. You are no longer a victim of fate's anomalies. You become the architect of your own serenity. Consider the small disruptions in your day. A delay, a criticism, a cancelled plan. For most, these are mood-ruining mistakes. For the initiate, they are training grounds. Every small frustration is an opportunity to test the anchor. Can you hold your axis while the wind blows? Can you respond gracefully when the system delivers an unexpected result? If you can do this in the small things, you will be prepared for the large fractures in the canvas that life will inevitably present. This inner stability creates a fascinating contrast with the chaos of the world. While others run in circles trying to fix a reality they can't control, you walk with a calmness that seems supernatural. It's not that you don't feel the pain or the uncertainty. It's that you've understood they are part of the landscape, not the spectator. You've stopped identifying with the turbulence and have begun to identify with the consciousness that observes it. But this anchor isn't just a refuge. It's a foundation for clear action. When you're not blinded by the need for permanence or the fear of change, your decisions become precise. You act not out of fear of loss, but out of the joy of expressing your higher nature in the present moment. You move with the grace of someone who knows the journey is the destination, and that the destination is always this present moment, no matter what the glitch decides to project onto the screen of your senses. However, to strengthen this anchor, we must look more closely at the origin of our perceptions. Because even though we have the rudder, we're still navigating a sea we perceive through filters that don't always tell us the truth. This leads us to delve deeper into the nature of our own subjective lens. This is where the Stoic anchor becomes a technology of consciousness. It's not a rigidity that tries to stop the world, but a flexibility that allows the world to be as it is without destroying your center. The most common mistake is confusing peace with the absence of problems, but the peace that comes from wisdom is the ability to maintain inner silence while the system roars outside. It's the understanding that noise is just information, data passing through your mind's processor, but it doesn't have to alter the frequency of your soul. If you observe closely, you'll see that most of the failures that keep you up at night are pure projections of a mind seeking an impossible permanence. You worry about the possibility of a mistake in your career, a rift in a relationship, or a financial loss because your programming tells you that these things define your security. The anchor allows you to see these situations for what they are: fluctuations in the code. When you stop giving them the power to define who you are, they lose their ability to hurt you. You become the conscious space where the drama occurs, but not the drama itself. This is true sovereignty. You don't need the universe to behave a certain way for you to be okay. You've hacked the ego's reward system. While the rest of the world chases the carrot of external stability, a stability that the first secret already showed us is non-existent, you settle into the stability of your own will. It's a state of invulnerability born from accepting the total vulnerability of all things. Paradoxically, it's by letting go of everything that you finally become immovable. Imagine the freedom that comes from not having to defend an image of yourself that is, by definition, ever-changing. The Stoic anchor frees you from the need to be right, to be admired, or to avoid the judgment of others. All of that is just shadows projected onto the wall of simulation. By anchoring yourself in your virtue and your capacity for present judgment, you disconnect from the web of collective anxiety. You begin to operate from a frequency of serenity that the world cannot understand and therefore cannot corrupt. But this anchor requires maintenance. It's not something you throw out once and forget. It's a constant practice of recalibration. Every morning, before the world starts bombarding you with its demands, you must sit down and remember the nature of reality. You must remind yourself that today, like every day, the system will present anomalies. People will be difficult, plans will fail, the body will feel fatigued. By anticipating these glitches, you strip them of their element of surprise. When they occur, you don't react with indignation, but with recognition. Here's the glitch I was expecting. Here's my opportunity to use the anchor. This perspective transforms your entire life into a metaphysical training ground. There are no longer bad days, only days with varying levels of difficulty for your practice. Failure ceases to be an enemy and becomes your most rigorous teacher. It forces you to ask yourself again and again, where are you seeking your peace right now? On the shifting surface of the river, or in the depths of your own being? As you strengthen this ability to navigate, you'll notice your relationships with others change as well. You no longer demand they act according to your scripts, because you understand they too are grappling with their own illusions of permanence and their own fears. Your anchor allows you to offer them a space of calm, a non-judgmental, non-reactive presence. You become a stable point of reference in a world that seems to have lost its way. Living with the Stoic anchor in a world of impermanence is the ultimate expression of metaphysical intelligence. It is understanding that the glitch is the language of awakening. Every time something breaks, you are given the opportunity to see what cannot be broken. Every time something ends, you are invited to connect with that which has no beginning and no end. In the end, you discover that the anchor is not attached to anything in this world, but is woven into the very essence of the consciousness that observes the entire game. However, to truly master the art of navigating this fragmented reality, we must go beyond our emotional response. We must question not only how we react to what we see, but the very nature of what we are seeing. For if the first secret revealed to us that nothing is permanent, the second secret will force us to question whether what we perceive even has an existence independent of our own gaze. We are about to enter a territory where the distinction between observer and observed begins to fade. If the world is a constant flow, who decides what form that flow takes? Does the universe deliver a finished reality, or is it our own perception that filters, distorts, and creates the world we believe we inhabit? The answer to this enigma is the second great secret hidden behind the failure. Imagine a room in absolute stillness. Outside, the gale dismantles the horizon, but inside, not a single flame flickers. This state is not a product of chance, nor of the resistance of the walls. It is the deliberate design of the inner emptiness. We often seek a foothold to stop the drift, but the truth is more demanding. Stability is not born from holding on, but from relinquishing the need to cling. Observe the mountain. It doesn't ask permission from the clouds to remain. It doesn't struggle against the gusts to prove its weight. It simply is. To reach that stature, you must first dismantle the illusion that the world owes you a calm sea. Water is what it is. The tides are indifferent. Your power lies solely in the quality of your presence as a witness. By ceasing to demand that reality conform to your sketches, friction vanishes. You are no longer a victim of the flow, but the very depth that contains it. Silence. Authentic silence, the kind that transforms, is not the absence of noise. It is the manifestation of a lucidity so absolute that no external discord can penetrate it. Ask yourself, in the refuge of this moment, what remains when you strip away titles, possessions, and expectations? That residue, that silent spark, is the only thing that has always been yours. Focus there, not on the external phenomenon, but on the one who observes it without blinking. Here begins the architecture of the spirit, not in raising higher walls, but in understanding that you are the space they purport to protect. You are the atmosphere that envelops the chisel, more than the block suffering the impact. In that immensity, the wound loses its name. Here, silence finally reveals its message. Inhabit that vastness where opposition vanishes, rupture is impossible. You are at last invulnerable. Chapter 4. The Alchemy of the Moment. Stop. For a moment, abandon the urgency to reach the conclusion of this thought. Often, we journey through life as if time were a thread we must quickly unravel, hoping that at the end, a reward awaits us that justifies the weariness. But wisdom is not found in the outcome. The true power of the Spirit manifests itself in the quality of the encounter with the now, especially when that now presents itself in the form of difficulty. Imagine that your consciousness is a laboratory, a sacred silent space where the raw matter of reality is processed. Most men and women flee from what they consider unfavorable. They see conflict, lack, or pain as intruders who have profaned their peace. They lament friction without understanding that without it, the soul remains in a sterile softness. There is no temperance in emptiness, nor strength in the absence of gravity. Character only acquires its sharpest edge when it clashes against the stone of reality. The alchemy I speak of is not about transforming lead into physical gold. That is a distraction for the greedy. True transmutation occurs when you manage to change the meaning of what happens to you. Consider this carefully. Nothing that occurs outside your inner boundaries possesses an intrinsic value of good or bad. Facts are neutral. They are events in a cosmic dance of cause and effect. It is your judgment that colors the experience. It is your perspective that turns a necessary rain into a disaster or a loss into an insurmountable tragedy. When you learn to observe the moment without immediately labeling it, something amazing happens. The weight of circumstance begins to dissolve. You are no longer a castaway tossed about by the waves of fortune. You become the ocean itself, containing both the tempest and the calm beneath its surface. This is the first step in the alchemical work, distillation. You must separate the fact from the emotion it evokes. If someone offends you, the fact is simply a series of sound vibrations traveling through the air. The pain is your creation. If you lose a possession, the fact is a change in the configuration of matter. The anguish is your interpretation. I am not asking you to be indifferent, but to be lucid, to recognize that you have the absolute power to decide what each event represents in the architecture of your life. Observe the fire again. Fire does not select what it consumes. It does not say, this branch is too dry or this log is too heavy. Fire simply transforms everything it touches into light and heat. That should be your disposition. Do not choose your battles based on comfort. Accept the material that fate places on your table today, however rough or hurtful it may seem, and ask yourself, how can I use this to elevate my understanding? If life offers you solitude, do not call it isolation. Call it the necessary retreat to hear your own voice. If it offers you failure, do not see it as a wall. Consider it the shedding of what no longer serves, so that the essential can emerge. Every second is a catalyst. There are no lost moments if there is an awakened mind processing them. We are accustomed to seeking divinity in the extraordinary, in miracles, or in the great milestones of history. But divinity is a constant presence that pulsates in the touch of your skin with the air, in the pressure of your feet on the earth, and, above all, in the ability to remain whole when everything external seems to crumble. Resilience is the key. But not a rigid resistance that breaks under impact, but a fluid resistance, like that of water that adapts its shape to the channel but never loses its essence. When you stop opposing the current of what is, you begin to use the energy of that same current to propel yourself. The wise person does not waste their strength trying to stop the river. They learn to navigate it with such agility that even the rapids become allies in their progress. Remember, the strongest metal is born from the hottest furnace. Don't ask for the fire to go out. Ask that your nature be so noble that it can dwell in the flames without being consumed, emerging from them with a brilliance that no shadow can extinguish. At this very moment, there is something in your surroundings that makes you uncomfortable. Some worry whispers in the back of your mind. Don't ignore it. Don't try to bury it under superficial distractions. Look it straight in the eye. Strip it of your labels. Observe its pure geometry. What is it really when you remove your fear? It is energy. It is movement. It is the universe expressing itself through a form you have not yet learned to love. Alchemy begins there, the moment you cease to be the victim of circumstance and become the author of its meaning. Now that you have grasped the neutrality of facts, we must penetrate to the very core of the process. It is not enough to observe the metal. It is imperative to wield the hammer. Most people spend their lives trying to smooth the rough edges of the world. They desperately seek a surface where there is no friction, a refuge where nothing demands more of them than their current capacity. But you who seek mastery must understand that comfort is the shroud of excellence. What the world presents to you as a blow, your consciousness must receive as a design challenge. Enter the silence of your own forge. Imagine that space where the noises of the outside world, criticism, material losses, unexpected turns of fortune, arrive only as distant echoes. In this command center, you are the absolute sovereign. Here, the question is not, why is this happening to me, but what shape will I give this? Transmutation requires brutal honesty. To turn pain into wisdom, you must first stop embellishing it with victimhood. Victimhood is the rust of the spirit. It consumes strength from within and clouds vision. When you let go of the need for others to validate your suffering, you reclaim the energy you previously wasted complaining. That energy is precisely the fuel you need for your work. Consider the concept of the eternal present. The past is ash, the future, a cloud that shifts shape before you can touch it. Only in this precise heartbeat, in this instant slipping through your fingers, lies the possibility of alchemy. You cannot transform what happened yesterday, nor what you fear will happen tomorrow. Your power is confined to the response you give now. If you master the present, you master eternity, because life is nothing more than an endless succession of these small temporary laboratories. Let's talk about vigilance. For the average person, thoughts are like runaway horses dragging them through swampy terrain. For the alchemist, thought is the finest tool, the chisel with which they carve reality. You must become the sentinel of your own mind. Every time an idea of scarcity or weakness tries to cross the threshold, identify it. Don't judge it, simply name it. By naming it, you cease to be the emotion and become the observer. In that brief space between stimulus and reaction lies your freedom. It is there, in that millimeter of awareness, that the miracle occurs. Where the lead of anger cools into the silver of temperance. Where fear, under the weight of your attentive gaze, disintegrates to reveal the courage that was always hidden beneath. Don't try to make the world simpler. Simplicity doesn't produce greatness. The noblest marble is the most difficult to work, but it is the only one capable of holding the details of a masterpiece. You are, simultaneously, the sculptor and the material. Every blow life deals is an opportunity to strip away what is superfluous, to shed the layers of false ego, useless pretensions, and inherited fears that obscure your true nature. What remains when the fire has consumed all that is flammable? The essential remains. An essence that does not depend on circumstances to shine, a clarity that does not flicker at the approach of night. Having reached this point in your ascent, you will understand that the greatest transmutation is not changing what you see, but transforming the one who sees. When the observer becomes whole, the entire universe reorganizes itself to reflect that wholeness. The division between I and what happens to me begins to fade. You realize that you are the space where the cosmos rehearses its transformations. You are the stage and the actor, the fire and the wood, the gold and the crucible. Embrace the paradox of your existence. You are vulnerable in form, but invincible in essence. While the body dwells in the storm, the mind can reside on the summit. This is not an escape, but a position of strategic advantage. From the heights of awareness, the problems that once seemed like mountains now reveal themselves as mere wrinkles in the tapestry of time. Close your eyes for a second. Even if you are in motion, feel the solidity of your presence. You are not your shifting thoughts. You are not your fleeting emotions. You are not your possessions that time will inevitably reclaim. You are the intelligence that witnesses all of it. In that identification lies the ultimate victory. As you finish this chapter, carry this certainty with you. There is nothing on the horizon that can diminish you if you refuse to grant it that power. The world has the force of facts. You have the power of meaning. And in the dance between the two, it is meaning that always has the final word. Be prepared, because once you've learned to transform the moment, time ceases to be an executioner and becomes your most expansive canvas. Chapter 5. The Temple of Integrity. We often inhabit our lives as if they were someone else's construction, a facade we show to the world, hoping others will validate the strength of our walls. But the true architecture of being doesn't happen in the light of public recognition. Character, that silent force that bears the weight of your existence, is forged in the shadows. There where no one is watching, where there is no applause, and where the only voice that resonates is that of your own conscience. Consider the construction of a great cathedral. The eyes of the passerby marvel at the spires that pierce the sky, the stained glass windows that filter the light, and the ornamentation that crowns the naves. However, none of that would exist if, meters below, in the darkness of the earth, there weren't a framework of rough, unfinished stone, hidden and bearing tons of pressure without complaint. That invisible foundation is integrity. Integrity is not a moral standard imposed from the outside. It is not a code of conduct you follow out of fear of punishment or desire for reward. It is, in its purest essence, the absolute coherence between what you perceive as truth and what you do as action. It is the state in which there is no longer a division between your thoughts and your actions. Ask yourself in the refuge of this silence, who are you when the world's gaze turns away? When the titles you hold fade, when possessions can no longer speak for you, and when the noise of societal expectations dies down, what remains? That residue of will, that core that cannot be negotiated or sold, is the foundation of your inner temple. Most people live in constant fragmentation. They say one thing, feel another, and end up doing a third, driven by the currents of expediency or fear of rejection. This internal division is the source of all weakness. A house divided against itself cannot withstand the onslaught of the seasons. Every small betrayal of your own principles, every time you remain silent out of convenience when you should speak up, or act out of vanity when you should stay in the shadows, creates a crack in your foundation. Do not underestimate the power of small erosions. A building doesn't usually collapse from a sudden earthquake, but from the accumulation of cracks ignored for years. Integrity is built on the smallest things. It is cultivated in the way you order your thoughts upon waking, in the precision with which you keep a promise only you know, in the respect you show yourself in absolute solitude. There is no room for pretense here. In the laboratory of your soul, truth is the only element that cannot be faked. We often confuse reputation with character. Reputation is what others think of you. It's a shadow, a fickle projection dependent on the light of others. Character is who you truly are. The shadow may lengthen or shrink depending on the angle of the sun, but the body that casts it remains constant. The wise person doesn't waste energy trying to manipulate their shadow. They focus all their attention on strengthening the substance that generates it. Listen carefully. Freedom doesn't consist of doing what one wants, but in having the strength to do what one knows is right, despite what one feels. Impulse is blind, integrity is seeing. Dwelling in this temple demands constant vigilance. The outside world will always try to invade your sacred space. It will offer you shortcuts, tempt you with the false glitter of instant approval, and try to convince you that a small compromise with falsehood will have no consequences. But the architect of the spirit knows that there are no small compromises. You are either whole or you are not. There is no middle ground when it comes to the strength of a beam. Imagine that every decision you make is a stone you place in your construction. If the stone is of dubious quality, if it's warped by convenience, the entire upper level will be compromised. Building with truth is a slow, sometimes painful, and almost always solitary process. It requires rejecting instant gratification in favor of a stability that only time can reveal. But there is a reward the world cannot understand. When you achieve that inner unity, when your word is law to yourself, and your actions are the exact reflection of your center, you attain a peace that no storm can disturb. You no longer need to defend yourself because there is nothing to hide. You no longer need to seek security outside because you have become your own refuge. Invulnerability is not born of arrogance, but of the absence of cracks. Look inward. In what areas of your life have you allowed the weeds of inconsistency to grow? Where have you ceased to be the master of your yes and your no? Do not judge yourself cruelly, but observe yourself with unflinching clarity. Recognition is the first step in restoration. To build a temple that will withstand the test of time, you must first clear the ground. You must dig deep, remove the rubble of self-deception, and reach the bedrock of honesty. Only upon that rock can you build something worthy of the name of life. This is the work of the awakened person, to be the architect of their own integrity, not to impress the gods, nor to be remembered by others, but because it is the only way to inhabit existence with dignity and purpose. Having established the invisible foundation of your inner architecture, it is imperative to turn your gaze toward the daily execution of that truth. Solidity is not a static concept that one possesses, but a flow of decisions that is renewed with every breath. Analyze the power of your words. In most social circles, language has become a devalued currency. We speak to fill voids, to seduce, or to conceal our true intentions. However, for those who aspire to mastery, discourse is a direct extension of their being. Your yes must possess the steadiness of rock, and your no the clarity of a blade that separates the essential from the incidental. When your outward expression coincides precisely with your deepest conviction, you acquire a gravity that others perceive without need for explanation. This resonance is what grants true authority, not the volume of the voice, but the density of the truth that underpins it. Those who have managed to unify their inner layers do not fear the harshness of others' judgment. The search for approval is the shackle that keeps most people in a state of psychological servitude. They clothe themselves in borrowed opinions and behave according to scripts written by invisible hands. Breaking this cycle requires an act of radical self-denial. You must be willing to walk alone if the price of companionship is betraying your principles. Chosen solitude is not a lack. It's the space where authenticity breathes without being suffocated. In that voluntary isolation, you discover that the only audience that truly matters is the one that looks back at you from the mirror at the end of the day. Now unravel the nature of commitment. Loyalty to oneself is the highest form of courage. It's not about stubborn rigidity, but about fidelity to the light you found in your moments of greatest clarity. Often, when the clouds of emotion or fatigue obscure the sky of the mind, we forget the certainties we attained under the sun of reason. Integrity consists of acting according to what you saw in the light, even when you find yourself immersed in shadow. It's holding the helm with a steady hand when the fog obscures the stars, trusting the compass you yourself calibrated in the calm. Observe how this unity transforms your relationship with time. Those who live divided experience the passing of days as either an escape or a weight. There's always something to hide, a facade to retouch, or a lie to maintain. This maintenance consumes vital energy that should be used for growth. In contrast, inner transparency generates absolute lightness. Having nothing to defend, there are no vulnerable flanks. The peace of one who is whole, without fissures or watertight compartments, is a fortress that requires no walls. Reflect on incorruptibility. It is not the absence of temptation, but the presence of a purpose so vast that nothing the world offers can serve as currency. The bribe of fate, whether in the form of pleasure, power, or security, loses its effect when you realize that none of it can add a single ounce to your spiritual stature if the cost is the fragmentation of your center. The wise person prefers outward poverty to inward bankruptcy. They know that empires fall and riches dissolve, but sovereignty over one's own spirit is the only possession that crosses the threshold of time. There will come a point in your development where the distinction between what you do and what you are will completely vanish. Your actions will cease to be voluntary efforts and become natural expressions of your core. Like water that doesn't strive to be wet, nor fire to emit heat, you will flow with a coherence that transcends conscious will. In this state of grace, integrity ceases to be a burden and becomes your greatest rest. You have eliminated friction. You have erased the distance between thought and action. Inhabit this calm. Feel the solidity of finally being a whole. In the stillness of this learning, recognize that each challenge you face is a stress test for your structure. Don't avoid them. Be grateful for the opportunity to verify that your main beams remain firm. Each victory over weakness, each refusal to succumb to baseness, strengthens the fabric of your soul. You are forging an identity that doesn't depend on chance, but on deliberate and conscious construction. As you close this cycle of reflection, take this premise with you. Life doesn't ask you to be perfect, it asks you to be whole. Perfection is a marble statue, cold and inert. Integrity is a living organism, capable of healing and growing stronger in the face of impact. Maintain your center. Guard your truth with the ferocity of one who knows that within it resides their only true freedom. The world can take your air, your space, and your life, but it can never steal the satisfaction of having been true to the light that dwells within you. That is the ultimate victory, the only one worth winning. Chapter 6. The Witness's Mastery. Observe the movement of your hands, and notice how, although they belong to you, they do not constitute your essence. In the same way, the events that unfold throughout your day surround you, brush against you, and even shake you, but they never manage to penetrate that zone of silence where your true identity resides. The great tragedy of a dormant consciousness is confusing the stage with the actor, the weather with the mountain. Observe the nature of your reactions. We almost always respond to the world mechanically. Someone makes a criticism and instantly your chest tightens. A project fails and your mind is flooded with shadows. This immediacy is the mark of slavery. It's proof that you still allow invisible strings to move your limbs and alter your pulse. But there is an alternative, a faculty that separates the wise from the slave, the ability to inhabit the space between stimulus and response. That space is your true stronghold. It's not a physical place, but a quality of attention. It's a millimeter of freedom where you can stop, breathe, and decide what meaning you will give to what is happening. If you manage to expand that margin, even for a second, you will have won a victory greater than the conquest of 10 cities, because in that second, you cease to be an effect of external causes and become the primary cause of your own internal state. Analyze the flow of your thoughts as if they were clouds crossing a vast sky. You are not the cloud, you are the sky. Clouds can be white and light, or black and heavy with storm. They can bring freshness or destruction. But the sky remains. The sky is not stained by lightning, nor torn apart by the wind. Its nature is vastness, an absolute embrace that allows everything to pass without anything permanently altering it. To reach this stature, it is necessary to practice the art of radical detachment. This is not emotional coldness, nor selfish indifference to the pain of others or oneself. On the contrary, it is a higher form of compassion. By not being entangled in the drama of appearances, you can see more clearly. You can act with a precision that the blinded by passion will never know. Consider how we spend our lives trying to control the uncontrollable. We want time to stop when we are happy and to speed up when we suffer. We demand that people behave according to our projections and that chance always favor us. That struggle is the root of all anguish. The awakened individual, on the other hand, stops fighting the current, not because they are weak, but because they have understood that true strength lies in flowing with the law of things. Learn to be the impassive witness of your own existence. When you feel anger beginning to boil in your blood, don't say, "I am angry." Say, "I observe the presence of anger." This subtle linguistic distinction changes the entire chemistry of your being. By naming the emotion from the outside, you take away its power of possession. You are no longer the anger. You are the observer who notices how anger tries to colonize your mind. In that distance lies your salvation. Visualize the surface of a deep lake. If you throw in a stone, ripples are created. If the wind blows, ridges appear. But 10 meters deep, the stillness is absolute. The light filters differently, and the silence reigns supreme. Your daily task is to descend into those depths, to not allow the surface turbulence to dictate the peace within you. Most people live on the periphery of themselves. They identify with their successes, their bodies, their possessions, or the image they project to others. They are like ships without ballast, at the mercy of any gust of opinion or fortune. You, on the other hand, must seek the axis, that point of stillness that doesn't rotate, even though the whole world revolves around it. This training doesn't require great external feats. It is cultivated in the insignificance of the everyday. In the moment someone interrupts you and you decide not to get irritated. In the instant you lose something valuable and decide not to lament. In the pause you take before judging a situation you don't understand. It is these small exercises in withdrawal that build the muscles of the spirit. Don't wait for favorable circumstances to find calm. That is the peace of cemeteries. Seek calm amidst the blaze. Seek serenity while the roar of battle assaults your ears. That is the only peace worth possessing, for it is the only one no one can take from you. The universe is ceaseless change. Forms are born to die, seasons follow one another relentlessly, and nothing remains the same for more than a heartbeat. Trying to cling to the transient is like trying to catch smoke with your hands. Open your fingers. Let what must go, go. Let what must come, come. By relinquishing the need for possession, you become master of everything. For you are no longer the servant of your desires, but the lucid spectator of a cosmic dance that has no beginning and no end. In that observation, in that clear and non-judgmental gaze, is where you finally discover freedom. Notice the weight of the silence that underlies each of these words. That emptiness isn't a lack of sound. It's the fullness of a presence that needs no adjectives to sustain itself. Most of the time, the noise that dwells within us is the echo of a lost battle against the inevitable. We speak to hide our vulnerability or to convince the world of an importance that, deep down, we know is illusory. However, when you manage to position yourself as someone who witnesses the flow without intervening, language becomes unnecessary. Your very existence becomes the answer. Observe the paradox of detached action. Acting from the center doesn't mean being passive. It means that your actions no longer stem from lack or blind ambition, but from a harmony with the needs of the moment. When you cease to be the anxious protagonist of your own story, you become an instrument of a much vaster will. The hands work, the feet walk, the mind reasons. But the self that claimed credit for every success has dissolved in the clarity of the present. Feel the lightness of not having to defend an image before anyone. That mask you've worked so hard to sculpt, that identity based on your achievements, your pains, or your certainties, is, in reality, the narrowest cell you inhabit. By renouncing it, you lose nothing real. You simply stop carrying a corpse. Pure consciousness has no name, no age, no history. It is a spark of eternal intelligence that contemplates for a brief instant the unfolding of temporal forms. Recognize the invulnerability of one who possesses nothing that time can take away. If your security depends on the strength of your health, the loyalty of your loved ones, or the solidity of your assets, you are building on sea foam. Everything that is born is destined to wither. Everything that unites will eventually separate. This is the inflexible law of matter. But the witness, the one who observes the process of withering with the same serenity with which they greeted the budding, does not suffer from the change. They know that the essence lies not in the changing form, but in the gaze that remains. Notice the freedom that arises when you stop classifying moments into categories of pleasure or displeasure. This mental exercise of accepting what is, without trying to make it something else, transmutes poison into medicine. If illness arrives, it is received as a teacher of finitude. If success appears, it is treated as a passing guest who will soon depart. By withdrawing judgment, the world ceases to be a battlefield and transforms into a hall of mirrors. Each event reflects back an image of your own level of lucidity. Understand that true mastery does not consist of avoiding pain, but in not allowing pain to become suffering. Pain is a physical or emotional response, a necessary impact on the fabric of life. Suffering, on the other hand, is the story you tell yourself about that pain. It's your ego's resistance to accepting the reality of the wound. When you withdraw the narrative, the pain becomes a pure, manageable, finite sensation. It loses its power to colonize your future and embitter your present. Perceive the authority that emanates from the one who dwells at the center of their own storm. It's not an authority imposed by force, but one recognized by its stillness. In a world of shouting, the one who remains silent from wisdom possesses the most powerful message. In a world of running away, the one who remains present in the face of discomfort is the only one who truly moves forward. Your presence, stripped of artifice, acts as a reminder to others that peace is possible, even when the horizon seems to crumble. Let go of the illusion that there is a final destination you must reach to be whole. Fullness is not a goal. It is the quality of your attention in this very second. There is nothing out there that can complete you, because you have never been incomplete. You have only been distracted. You have been searching for the sun with a flashlight, unaware that it is you who casts the light on the path. Abandon urgency. Eternity is in no hurry. Empires rise and fall, stars burn out, and civilizations turn to dust. But the consciousness that witnesses this cycle remains unchanged. By identifying with that consciousness, you partake of its immortality. You cease to be an isolated fragment and recognize yourself as the totality of the process expressing itself through a unique form. This learning process concludes with a commitment to spiritual sobriety. Do not seek artificial ecstasies or noisy revelations. Seek the cold, clean clarity of midday. Seek the honesty to acknowledge your own shadows without retreating. It is in this transparency that the work is completed. By witnessing your own transformation, you cease to be the block of marble that suffers the blow and become the vision that guides the sculptor's hand. Inhabit this sacred distance. Breathe in this vastness that nothing can confine. You are at last the master of your gaze, and therefore the architect of your own universe. Chapter 7. The Alliance with the Inevitable. Analyze the root of your discontent. Almost always, bitterness arises from a discrepancy between what reality is and what you demand it to be. This distance is the territory where suffering establishes its dominion. We spend decades trying to correct the script of the universe, as if we were editors of a play already written in the stars. But the true power of the spirit isn't manifested in the ability to alter the external world, but in the elegance with which you merge with what unfolds. Consider the flow of water over the stones of a river. The water doesn't stop to argue with the obstacle. It doesn't lament the hardness of the granite or the steepness of the riverbed. It simply flows. It finds the crack, surrounds the mass, adapts, and in that adaptation lies its unstoppable force. At the end of the journey, it is the rock that has been polished, not the water. This same fluidity is what you must cultivate in your encounter with destiny. When you stop saying no to events, the energy you previously wasted on resistance is freed up to be used for building. Look closely at the nature of commitment to reality. This isn't about passive resignation, about bowing your head and accepting the blow with the spirit of the defeated. Resignation is heavy and opaque. An alliance with destiny is light and transparent. Allying yourself with the inevitable means recognizing that every situation is an invitation to practice virtue. If the day brings conflict, it's an invitation to temperance. If it brings solitude, it's an invitation to self-sufficiency. If it brings pain, it's an invitation to fortitude. In this framework, nothing is lost. Everything becomes an asset. Everything becomes fuel for the fire of your conscience. Examine the origin of your fear of the future. Fear is always a lack of confidence in your own ability to process experience. You fear what might come because you believe you won't have the tools to handle it. But if you look back, you'll discover that you've always had them. You've survived each of your worst days. You've gone through fires that you thought would reduce you to ashes, and yet here you are, denser, more real, deeper. The alliance with the inevitable is the recognition that, no matter what the horizon brings, you are the laboratory where that event will be transmuted into wisdom. Feel the futility of complaining. Complaining is the language of the slave, of one who still believes the world is a parent who can be moved by lamentations. The universe is deaf to your pleas for comfort, but exquisitely sensitive to your willingness to learn. When you change "why me" to "what for," the weight of destiny ceases to be a burden and becomes a lever. You are here to be shaped by circumstances and simultaneously to give them a meaning they, on their own, do not possess. Relinquish the illusory control over external forms. It is an exhausting burden to try to make the wind always blow in your favor. Let go of that pretense. Allow the gusts to come from where they must. Your task is not to govern the weather, but to be a navigator so skilled that any wind can bring you to port. That mastery is only achieved when you stop fighting with reality and start using it. The wise person doesn't seek to make things happen as they want. They seek to want things as they happen. In that small investment of will lies the secret of invulnerable peace. Perceive the vibration of this moment. This second is the only one that exists. The past is a memory etched in water. The future is a shadow cast in the mist. All your power, all your integrity, and all your sovereignty are concentrated in the response you give to this precise moment. If this moment brings silence, inhabit it. If it brings clamor, be the unwavering center. By uniting with the now, you become untouchable. For there is no longer a you separate from the here that can be wounded. That is the true alchemy of the spirit, to transform necessity into choice. By choosing what destiny imposes upon you, you cease to be its victim and become its accomplice. And an accomplice of the universe is, by definition, a being that cannot be defeated. Attend to the strength that emanates from absolute acceptance. Often the will is worn down in a sterile struggle against the inexorability of what already is. We believe that by internally resisting a fait accompli, we are exercising some kind of control or justice. But that resistance is merely noise that clouds the lens of perception. True mastery arises the instant consciousness ceases to see the event as an adversary and begins to treat it as a formidable ally. Consider the unwavering laws that govern the movement of the stars or the cycle of the seasons. Nothing in the natural order apologizes for its rigor. Winter does not apologize for its cold, nor gravity for its weight. Those who awaken to this reality understand that peace is not found in the absence of difficulties, but in perfect synchronicity with them. By saying yes to the fabric of the inevitable, you rise above the polarity of success and failure. You are no longer the shipwrecked soul struggling to stay afloat, but water itself, which knows perfectly the depth of its own abyss. Feel the weight of this truth in your very bones. Freedom is not the power to choose what happens to you, but the power to decide who you are in the face of what happens. If fate imposes a burden upon you, that burden is, in reality, the necessary weight to keep your feet firmly planted on the ground amidst the storm. Difficulty is the anchor that grants you stability. By embracing restriction, you discover an inner freedom that no one can confiscate. It is the paradox of the wise, to be absolutely free within the chains of necessity. Analyze the flow of providence in your own story. Those moments you once labeled disastrous, those doors that slammed shut, were often the necessary detours to avoid an abyss you couldn't yet see. Life has its own intelligence that transcends the narrowness of your immediate desires. Trusting in that intelligence is not an act of blind faith, but a recognition of the complexity of the system you inhabit. You are a note in a vast symphony. Your task is not to change the score, but to perform your part with a perfection that transforms even silence into music. Notice how anguish dissolves when you stop projecting your fears onto the map of possibility. The future is not a monster lurking in the shadows, but a virgin extension of this very present. If you possess the strength to face what lies before you today, you will possess it tomorrow as well. Anxiety is the price you pay for trying to live in a time that doesn't yet exist. Return to the now. Cling to the solidity of your breath. Here, in the center of your own presence, the inevitable loses its terrifying edge to reveal its instructive face. Shed the pretense that the universe must be comfortable to be just. The justice of the cosmos is harmony, not comfort. Comfort weakens, challenge strengthens. If you aspire to an existence of silk and calm, you are asking for a living death. The spirit requires fire, pressure, and shock to reveal its true brilliance. The alliance with the inevitable is the pact you sign with your own potential, the commitment not to flee from the flames that will purify you. Perceive the clarity that arises when you cease to be the judge of reality and become its witness. By removing the adjectives good or bad from what happens, the world regains its original transparency. Things are what they are. Your judgment is the only thing that makes them unbearable. By unifying your will with the course of events, you erase the friction that consumes your vital energy. You become kinetic, fluid, unstoppable. Not because the world has stopped striking you, but because you have learned to be the void that the blow cannot reach. Recognize the sovereignty that silence grants in the face of adversity. While others are lost in complaint and lament, you remain in active stillness. This stillness is not indifference, it is strategic preparation. It is the moment when the alchemist processes the lead of fate to extract the gold of learning. In that private laboratory, each tear is distilled into vision, and each wound is sealed with the metal of experience. Carry this certainty with you. Nothing that is truly yours can be taken from you by chance. Your possessions, your health, and your reputation are loans from time that time, sooner or later, will reclaim. But the quality of your consciousness, the firmness of your center, and the elegance of your acceptance are eternal conquests. By allying yourself with the inevitable, you become invulnerable to loss, for you have deposited your treasure in a place where change has no jurisdiction. Dwell in this state of grace. Gaze at the horizon with a smile that doesn't depend on what the sun will bring tomorrow. You are the architect of an inner order, nourished by the same force that moves the galaxies. At last, you have understood that destiny is not a prison, but the stage where divinity rehearses its dance through you. Flow with the current and discover that you are the river. Chapter 8. The Irradiation of Character. Notice the subtle transformation that occurs in the environment when consciousness ceases to seek refuge and begins to project its own light. Until now, we have cultivated the inner sanctuary, securing the foundations and clearing away the debris of self-deception. But wisdom is not a treasure to be buried in the privacy of thought. It is a kinetic force that must inform every step, every word, and every silence in the theatre of the world. True excellence manifests when the being no longer needs to strive to appear whole, because wholeness has become its very breath. Analyze the weight your movement acquires when it springs from deep roots. Most people drift through life with a tragic lightness, like dry leaves carried by the whims of the moment or the winds of public opinion. They change direction at the slightest touch of criticism and wither under the shadow of others' indifference. However, those who have forged their will on the anvil of reason possess a unique gravity. This density is not heaviness, but stability. It is the steadfastness of the axis that allows everything else to revolve without crumbling. By moving from this certainty, the world ceases to be a threat and becomes the canvas upon which you paint your purpose. Perceive the distinction between the noise of ambition and the power of virtue. Ambition is a lack disguised as strength. It always needs more, always seeks applause, always fears loss. Virtue, on the other hand, is an excess of fullness. Act because it is your nature to act, just as the sun pours forth its brilliance without asking who receives it. Do not ask reality for permission to manifest your nobility. Nobility is not a title bestowed by others, but a quality of the spirit recognized in the precision of your actions and the restraint of your words. Observe the economy of effort that characterizes the lucid soul. There is an austere beauty in doing only what is necessary with just the right amount of tension and clear intention. We waste much of our vital energy on useless defenses, on explanations no one has asked for, and on chasing ghosts that bring no peace. The wise person, having unified their faculties, moves with the efficiency of a noble predator. There are no superfluous gestures, no empty words. Each action is a precise chisel stroke on the block of time. This sacred parsimony is what grants your presence an authority that does not require shouting to be obeyed. Notice how your relationship with others shifts when you stop needing them to validate your identity. By withdrawing the demand to be loved, admired, or understood, you regain absolute freedom. You are no longer a beggar for affection, but a generator of clarity. You can see others as they truly are, without the distortions of your own desires or needs. This clear vision allows you to be fair where others are biased and firm where others are fickle. True compassion is born from this sovereign distance. Only those who are not drowned in the sea of others' emotions can extend a firm hand to rescue the shipwrecked. Re-examine the hierarchy of your values in this very moment. What is driving your hand right now? If it is fear of the future or resentment of the past, you are operating from the periphery. Return to the center. Excellence demands that every act be an offering to truth, regardless of the immediate outcome. Success is an accident of fortune. Character is a conquest of the will. Prefer honorable failure to dishonorable triumph, for the former leaves you unscathed, while the latter erodes you to your core. Feel the steadfastness of your own judgment as the supreme tribunal of your days. Do not seek justice in the courts of the world, nor in the verdict of the crowd. The only sentence that should keep you awake at night is the one your own conscience pronounces. If it is at peace, the entire universe may be at war with you, and you will still be safe. If it condemns you, no palace or crown will be able to console you. The construction of this autonomy is the ultimate goal of discipline, to become the sole judge of your own life. Notice the radiance that emanates from this coherence. When a consciousness is whole, it emits a frequency that disorder cannot tolerate. Your mere presence begins to act as a catalyst for order in the surrounding chaos. Liars feel uneasy around you. The fickle find a foothold. The troubled find a haven. It is not something you actively do. It is something you are. It is the natural fragrance of integrity. This is the level where philosophy ceases to be a reading and becomes an embodiment. You no longer speak of justice, you are just. You no longer argue about strength, you are strong. The word has become flesh and dwells in the world with an authority that time cannot erode. Prepare to hold this light. The higher you ascend the ladder of character, the lonelier the landscape seems, but the vaster the horizon you survey. Do not fear the solitude of the summit. It is there that the air is purest and the vision unobstructed. In that clarity, you discover that the true reward of virtue is simply having practiced it. Chapter 9. The Geometry of Final Freedom. Listen to the echo of your own footsteps on this stretch of the ascent. Freedom is not an accumulation of rights, nor an expansion of external possibilities. It is, in its purest form, a reduction, a voluntary stripping away of all the identities the world has imposed upon you, and which you, out of inertia or fear, have accepted as your own. Upon reaching this point, having consolidated the steadfastness of your character and your alliance with the inevitable, you discover that the final obstacle is not destiny, nor adversity, nor finitude. The final obstacle is the memory of who you thought you were. Analyze the futility of the labels with which you have adorned your existence. Names, titles, triumphs, and scars are merely sediment in the bed of a current that never stops. Whoever clings to their personal history is trying to hold back the sea with a wall of sand. True sovereignty resides in the capacity to inhabit the present without the burden of yesterdays. When you manage to detach your worth from the tally of your days, you experience a lightness that most mistake for emptiness. But it is not emptiness, it is absolute availability. It is the transparency of crystal that allows light to pass through without retaining anything for itself. Beware the subtle trap of pride in one's own virtue. Even spiritual progress can become a new prison if you turn it into a trophy. The goal is not to be a superior individual, but to be a consciousness free from the need for comparison. True mastery is achieved when the effort to be whole disappears, giving way to spontaneous and precise action. Like the bow that does not hesitate to release the arrow, your life must flow without the noise of self-justification. In that absence of ego, the power of being manifests with a clarity that no forced will could emulate. Feel the steadiness of your center in the face of the dispersion of the multitude. The world is a whirlwind of unfulfilled desires and projected fears. Most people live in a state of perpetual reaction, bouncing between pleasure and pain like particles at the mercy of a force they don't understand. You, having cultivated inner silence, become a point of absolute stillness. You don't need to flee the clamor. You can be in the center of the public square and yet remain in the deepest and most fertile solitude. That autonomy is the only possession that time cannot corrode. Notice how perception is cleansed of prejudice. By ceasing to demand that the world provide you with meaning, you begin to see things in their raw and beautiful objectivity. A mountain is a mountain. Betrayal is a movement of another's psyche. Loss is a reconfiguration of matter. By removing the emotional charge from events, suffering dissolves. Only the pure fact remains, and before it, your capacity to respond. This is the geometry of freedom, a straight line between perception and action, without the deviations caused by hope or resentment. Notice the authority that emanates from one who desires nothing from others. By extinguishing the thirst for recognition, you become untouchable by manipulation. Praise brushes against you like the wind brushes against a rock, and insults are lost in the vastness of your equanimity. This is true invulnerability. It doesn't come from external armor, but from the absence of an internal target for the world's darts. You are sovereign because you are not a subject to your own passions or the expectations of others. Reflect on the brevity of life and the immensity of the legacy. Your passage through matter is a blink in the chronology of the cosmos. Yet the quality of that blink has metaphysical significance. By acting with righteousness, you are not merely improving your life. You are bearing witness to the possibility of excellence in a universe that seems to tend toward chaos. Your integrity is a signal, a beacon of coherence amidst the fog. You do not need your name to be remembered. It is enough that the frequency of your being has been emitted. The emanation of a noble life remains in the fabric of reality long after the form has faded. Dwell in this state of serene alertness. Do not seek refuge outside your own lucid awareness. Every situation is the crucible where freedom is tested. If the present is arduous, it is the precise measure of your strength. If it is placid, it is the opportunity for vigilance. In both cases, the goal is the same: to remain unaltered, undivided, present. At the end of the day, the only question that matters is whether you were the author of your response or merely the echo of circumstance. Find rest in movement and action in repose. This is the synthesis of all previous work. The seeker who has understood the nature of the witness no longer needs to seek peace. He is peace. His hands work in the world. His mind solves problems. His body feels weariness. But his essence resides on a plane where agitation has no jurisdiction. This harmonious duality is the sign of the being who has reached spiritual maturity. Ponder the steadfastness of this summit you have reached. Final freedom is not found in the conquest of new territories, nor in the accumulation of exotic knowledge. It resides, paradoxically, in the surrender of all resistance to what is. It is not a surrender of weakness, but of supreme intelligence. The individual who has unified his will with the necessity of the cosmos can no longer be harmed, for there is no rift between his will and the course of events. In this state, the distinction between internal and external begins to blur, revealing a unity that the fragmented mind can never conceive. Pay attention to the lightness that comes from letting go of hope. Hope is often a refined form of disdain for the present. It is the desire for something other than what is happening to occur. By releasing this burden, you recover the fullness of your energy to inhabit the now. You don't need the future to rescue you because you have discovered that salvation is a quality of your attention in this very second. This is true independence, not depending on outcomes to maintain the integrity of your center. If the outcome is favorable, it is received with equanimity. If it is adverse, it is processed with the same serenity with which the earth receives rain or drought. Analyze the silence that emanates from a consciousness that no longer justifies itself. Most beings consume their vitality trying to convince others and themselves of their own worth. They build monuments of words to mask the emptiness of their insecurity. But you, having forged a solid inner structure, can afford the luxury of silence. Your presence requires no arguments. Truth needs no defense. It simply stands on its own. In this economy of the spirit, every gesture acquires a sacred density, and every word spoken possesses the edge of a final judgment. Notice how perception becomes an impeccable dissecting tool. Without the filter of fear or ambition, events reveal themselves in their purest form. Financial hardship, illness, estrangement from an ally cease to be personal dramas and become transient configurations of matter and thought. By removing the burden of me from each event, the world regains its transparency. You are the conscious space where the universe thinks itself. You are no longer a fragment struggling against the whole, but the whole expressing itself through a lucid and autonomous focal point. Notice the invulnerability of one who has died to their desires before time claims their body. This is the great alchemical inversion. One who has renounced the demands of the ego has nothing left to lose. The threats of fate fall into the void, finding no foothold of vanity or attachment to cling to. This mystical death is, in reality, the birth into true freedom. It is to walk through the world like a guest who appreciates the banquet but is ready to leave at any moment without complaint or longing. This disposition grants a strength that terrifies tyrants and disconcerts fools. It is the strength of one who is the absolute master of their own death, and therefore of their own life. Scrutinize the subtle radiance you leave in your wake. It is not a blinding light, but a warmth that brings order. Having harmonized your inner layers, your mere existence acts as a reminder of the natural order. Without intending to, you compel those around you to confront their own disarray. Your calm is a mirror where the agitation of others is reflected in all its futility. Do not seek to teach or convince, simply be. The deepest influence is not that exerted by will, but that which emanates from coherence. A life that is whole is the most eloquent discourse one can utter. Pause for a moment and acknowledge the steadfastness of your presence. The world will keep turning. Empires will continue their cycle of rise and fall. Crowds will continue shouting their ephemeral truths to the wind. But you have found the axis. You have understood that freedom is not escaping the world, but inhabiting it from a height where noise cannot transform into music or discord at will, but is simply vibration. You are the architect of your own stillness, the guardian of a flame that is not fueled by external sources, but by the pure combustion of consciousness. Look at the horizon with the eyes of one who has already arrived home. There is nothing to seek outside. The search has ended because the seeker has recognized themselves as the territory. At the end of this geometry of freedom, you discover that the gateway was always open. All that was lacking was the courage to shed all that you were not in order to cross it. Now, with your spirit stripped bare and your will tempered, you are ready for the final step, total integration, where being and doing become a single, eternal reality. Dwell in this fullness. Breathe in this cold, pure air of the heights. You have ceased to be a victim of chance and have become the author of your destiny, not because you control what happens, but because you have conquered the only thing that truly matters, the quality of your response to existence. Here, in the silence of absolute self-sufficiency, is where true life begins. Chapter 10. The Unification of Being with the All. We now arrive at the heart of the paradox. Having hewn every stone of your inner architecture, having polished the mirror of your attention until no trace of dust remains, you discover that the goal was not to build a refuge from the world, but to become the world itself. The distinction between the perceiving subject and the perceived reality has been from the beginning the last veil of ignorance. One who has reached this altitude no longer experiences life as a clash of external forces against a private core, but as a continuous flow of the same substance that recognizes itself in every movement. Perceive the steadiness of your pulse amidst the universal fluctuation. That stillness does not belong to you as private property. It is the stillness of the cosmos manifesting through your form. By shedding the layers of identity we analyzed earlier, what remains is not an inert void, but a radiant presence that no longer needs to defend itself against anything. The struggle is over because the combatant has understood that the enemy was their own projection. When you stop seeing nature as something alien to be conquered or avoided, you acquire a power that blind will can never dream of. You become the riverbed and the water, the wind and the sail. Notice the quality of this silence that now dwells within you. It is not the muteness of one who has nothing to say, but the eloquence of one who has understood that truth is not captured with words, but with the steadfastness of being. In this state of integration, your actions cease to be calculated reactions and become direct emanations of cosmic necessity. You do what is right not because you follow a code, but because your nature has become identical with justice. There is no friction between your desire and reality, because you have extinguished the desire for things to be different from how they are. This is true ataraxia, an imperturbability that is born not of isolation, but of absolute communion with the present. Feel the steadfastness of your will merging with providence. Often the limited mind interprets surrender as defeat. However, in this higher metaphysics, surrender is the ultimate act of power. By unifying your will with the order of things, you become invincible. Nothing can go against you, because nothing happens outside the law you have accepted as your own. Sickness, old age, and even death cease to be threats and become necessary transitions within a vast economy of energy. Whoever lives from this perspective has already crossed the threshold of time. They dwell in eternity while their feet still touch the dust of the road. Notice how your gaze has become a tool of universal synthesis. You no longer see isolated fragments, but the whole fabric. Human conflicts, the ambitions of empires, and the small tragedies of daily life reveal themselves as vibrations on the surface of an unfathomable ocean. Your task is not to judge the wave, but to understand the depth that sustains it. This vision grants you a cold and perfect compassion, an empathy that isn't swayed by sentimentality, but offers the solidity of an unwavering truth. You are the anchor the world needs, precisely because you don't belong to the world of desires and fears. Reflect on the disappearance of the narrative self. That voice that once recounted your sorrows and your glories, that entity that sought personal meaning amidst chaos, has been silenced by the light of lucidity. What remains is pure action, pure being. There is no one to perform the work. The work is performed through you. This is absolute freedom, to be a flawless instrument of universal consciousness. In this stripping away lies the greatest of riches. By possessing nothing, not even a personal history, you have become master of the whole. Every star, every blade of grass, and every other person's tear is part of your own spiritual anatomy. Maintain this frequency of awareness. Do not allow the inertia of habit to return you to fragmentation. Mastery is not a state to be attained and filed away, but an act of presence that is renewed with every breath. Every second is the first time the universe encounters itself through your eyes. Treat this encounter with the solemnity it deserves. You are the witness to a constant revelation, the place where the mystery of existence becomes aware of its own magnificence. Walk with the steadfastness of one who knows the map and the territory. There are no more doubts, because there is no longer a seeker separate from the sought. You have reached the center of the labyrinth and discovered that the walls were made of glass. Behind them, there was only you, waiting for your gaze to be pure enough to see through the illusion. Notice the steadfastness of this stillness that now envelops you. It is not the repose of one who has finished an external task, but the peace of one who has ceased to be a task for themselves. Upon reaching this point of ascension, the distinction between effort and existence has completely dissolved. There is no longer an individual trying to attain wisdom. There is wisdom expressing itself through an individual. This is the absolute transparency we sought from the very beginning, a state in which the light of consciousness encounters no obstacles, no shadows of doubt, no dust of old pretensions. Look at the horizon of your own finitude with a clarity that dispenses with fear. You have understood that death is not an enemy lurking in the future, but a process of constant renewal that dwells in every breath. By releasing the need for permanence, you have gained eternity. He who does not cling to his name or his history becomes uncatchable by time. You are the current, not the shore. You are the space that allows forms to dance, change, and vanish without your essence suffering any diminution. This is true mental self-sufficiency, not depending on the continuity of form to recognize the infinitude of being. Notice the power of your influence in this final silence. Your passage through the world no longer leaves traces of ambition or anguish. You leave behind a trail of order, a strand of coherence that others will perceive as a subtle aroma or a shift in the soul's temperature. You don't need to bequeath stone monuments or engraved speeches. Your legacy is the quality of the vibration you emit in this very moment. An awakened consciousness is a beacon that doesn't need to proclaim its brilliance. It simply shines. And in that light, the confusion of others finds its own path to clarity. Evaluate the steadfastness of your will, unified with universal law. The conflict between what I want and what happens no longer exists. That dichotomy was the engine of suffering. By merging with the necessity of facts, you have acquired the strength of the stars and the patience of the mountains. You are free because you no longer have anything to choose outside of what reality offers you. This lucid submission is the highest form of power. By not opposing anything, nothing can oppose you. You are invulnerable because you have ceased to be a separate target from the universe. Remain in this center. Do not seek new peaks to conquer or new mysteries to unravel. The deepest mystery has already been revealed. You are the place where the cosmos awakens. Every sensation that runs through your skin, every thought that crosses the screen of your mind, and every beat of your heart are movements of one and the same intelligence. By inhabiting this unity, the sense of isolation dissolves like fog before the midday sun. You have never been alone because there has never been an other. There has only ever been this eternal dance of consciousness with itself. Feel the steadfastness of your presence like an anchor in eternity. While the body follows its natural course toward dissolution, you remain. While empires rise and fall on the stage of history, you remain. Not as an isolated entity, but as the pure, all-encompassing gaze. You have accomplished the great alchemical work, transmuting the lead of mortal personality into the gold of timeless presence. There is nothing left to gain because you lack nothing. There is nothing left to lose because you possess nothing. Perceive the grace that emanates from this total spiritual nakedness. Walking without masks, living without defenses, and acting without pretense is the highest form of elegance. It is the return to original simplicity, enriched by the wisdom of the journey. The wise person is the one who, having learned everything, has the greatness to know nothing, allowing reality to speak to them with its own voice in every encounter. In that profound listening resides true communication with the divine. Dwell in this silence. May these words now dissolve into the space of your consciousness, leaving only the trace of an unwavering stillness. The chapter closes, but life, true life, the one that is neither born nor dies, continues its infinite unfolding through you. You are the author, you are the work, and you are the spectator. There is nothing more to say. Everything that matters is here, in the stillness of this breath, in the transparency of this gaze, in the steadfastness of this being who, at last, simply is. Conclusion: the return to the immutable origin. Pay attention to the vibration of the environment that awaits behind the veil of this reflection. As we return to trivial demands and brush against the unconsciousness of others, the temptation of nostalgia can cloud our vision. It is common to feel that the noise represents a profanation of the silence we have achieved. However, spirituality that does not translate into effective and serene action is nothing more than a fantasy of the ego. Your task now is to be the point of order that, by its mere existence, calms the surrounding agitation. Your center is now an active force, your equanimity a shield that requires no metal. Notice the steadfastness of your presence amidst the renewed agitation. Now that you have dismantled the illusions of a fragmented identity, your interaction with reality must be different. You no longer move like a shipwrecked person seeking a foothold in the tide, but like the very depth that sustains the movement of the surface. Every task, however trivial it may seem, whether managing finances, taking care of your health, or speaking to a stranger, is an opportunity to demonstrate the strength of your inner structure. The individual who has achieved self-sufficiency does not waste their vitality on unnecessary reactions. Notice the economy of your energy in the face of external provocations. The world will continue to operate under the laws of complaint, judgment, and blind ambition. You will hear cries that once would have incited you to defend yourself, and you will see injustices that once would have ignited a fire of bitterness in your chest. Keep your gaze clear. Your role is not to correct the disorder of the cosmos with angry words, but to radiate a coherence that makes the disorder seem ridiculous. By living in the world without being bound by its chains, your choices acquire an almost surgical precision. You say yes to what nourishes harmony and no to what scatters consciousness with a naturalness that dispenses with effort. Analyze the transformation of your relationships in this new light. By demanding nothing from others, neither love, nor approval, nor understanding, you become capable of offering them a truly fruitful presence. You no longer see in the other a tool for your own fulfillment, but a mirror of universal consciousness in a different phase of its unfolding. This noble distance allows for a deeper intimacy, free from the projections and demands that often stifle human affection. You are a refuge of stability for those around you, a silent compass pointing toward the north of wholeness without the need for didactic pronouncements. Consider the immanence of the sacred within the profane. Walking down the street, completing a bureaucratic procedure, listening to the roar of traffic. Everything is the unfolding of the same intelligence that moves the galaxies. By dissolving the boundary between the transcendent and the ordinary, the entire world becomes the arena of your practice. There are no longer wasted moments or barren places. Mental self-sufficiency manifests itself in the capacity to find wholeness in the fragment. In the stillness of a single breath lies the answer to all the questions the intellect formulated during centuries of external searching. Release the pretense that this state of lucidity is a static and guaranteed possession. Life is an incessant becoming. There will be times when bodily fatigue or the extreme pressure of circumstances try to veil the transparency of your mirror. Do not fight against these clouds with anguish. Remain in the observation of the phenomenon without identifying with it. Mastery lies in the speed of the return to the center, not in the absolute absence of oscillation. Each time you realize you've strayed into circular thinking, that simple act of noticing is already the return. Steadiness is a constant direction, not an immobile marble statue. Live with the elegance of one who knows the end of the road is identical to the beginning, but with a transformed perspective. You have returned to the starting point, but you are no longer the seeker begging for meaning outside yourself. You are meaning itself, the source and the channel, fused into a single reality that expresses itself in the absolute simplicity of this moment. The essence of your character is now your only discourse and your peace, the only proof that the work has been accomplished.